Broken Hill under the scope.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay. So initially, this presentation was intended to be given in Broken Hill to a group of collectors up there, and that was to happen in July of this year. But as with many other things, COVID got in the way, and it's been postponed indefinitely. But the main focus was that I was going to try and convert some more people to smaller specimens, minerals that you can appreciate under the microscope, because a lot of the collectors up there are, sorry, I've just seen Paul's comments, t-shirt weather. A lot of the collectors up there prefer larger specimens, but there are some issues with that, as you'll see. So what we have here is 5 specimens that are of the larger variety of, I'd say, typical Broken Hill minerals, but they're probably atypical. They're probably a little bit better than most of the larger ones that you see. But along with the sizes, and you can see there that they're all a fair size, there's also a hefty price tag in many instances. And that apart from the manganese bearing calcite up in the top right hand corner, which I didn't see a price, the total of the other 4 was $176,000 in 2019. So not exactly cheap. Anyway, just getting to under the microscope. Stop commenting, people. Just a few definitions. So under the scope means subjected to critical examination or analysis, under close inspection or intense scrutiny, being studied very closely, usually because it is believed that something is wrong with it, but in this case, because it's small. And what you'll see in the following photos are that they are all almost entirely around about 3.5 millimeters across, so fairly small. Why micros? Well, from Broken Hill, according to Mindat, there's a little bit over 350 species. Many of those really do need magnification to appreciate. Henk will find that when he gets his 300. Many species only occur as micros, so there's a rarity factor. And of course, perfection, smaller crystals are often more pristine. They're generally, and I say generally, more available. And of course, you need less space required. And more space means more specimens. And the last point there is that normally the micros, if you're buying Broken Hill micros, they're normally less to purchase than larger specimens. There are some exceptions where they can cost a little bit of money, but certainly not in the thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in my collection, and I have around about 170 species from Broken Hill, so that's a fair number. You're not going to see all of those today, but you'll see quite a few. And then if we look at why we've got so much variety, Broken Hill is a very, very old deposit. Over 1 billion years since it was first formed. It was originally thought to be black smokers. The geology is very complex because it's been folded and twisted and doubled over and dried out and covered up, and there's been a very long period of weathering. Broken Hill is in Western New South Wales. It's currently very arid in that environment. You've got a large range of elements, and I mentioned a few in the text there, but in the picture here, you can see all of the elements that have been included in the minerals of Broken Hill. And they come from a number of different environments as well. So you get them from the sulfide zone, the oxidized zone, from the effects of metamorphism. You've got rock forming minerals, there's post-mining minerals, and there's also slag deposits there that are a bit over 100 years old. So some of the slags also produce minerals that haven't been recorded elsewhere in the deposit. And if we just have a look at the periodic table, you can see there that it covers a fair bit of the periodic table. having a bit of a look at the deposit itself. It runs basically from the top right-hand corner, which is northwest, down through to the southeast. You can see here, this is the main township of Broken Hill, with the city centre in this area here. There's also an area to the south with housing and whatever, but the rest of it is, as you can see from this satellite photo, very brown, which is quite typical for the arid areas of Australia. And if you've got specimens from Broken Hill, you probably recognise some of the locations they've actually come from. So the line of load runs down through there, and it was originally split up into a number of blocks. That's why we get things like block 14 and block 12 and so on. Most of the minerals, the secondary minerals in particular, that are generally available came from the 1980s and 1990s from the block 14 open cut and the Kintore open cut. But you might also see specimens from time to time from, the North Mine quite a bit, some of the older Blackwood, the Consols, the Zinc Corporation, which is further to the southeast, and the Junction Mine. And this is what the outcrop looked like about 6 years or so after the start of mining. And you can see there's a smelter stack already in that particular location there. Now, we're looking basically towards the east here. The next photo will be taken from around about here, which is, well, somewhere in that sort of level, which is actually now on top of, it's no longer the Hill of Mullock as it was called. It's actually a hill of mullock. It's a proper hill of mullock. So all of this material has been built up from what's been extracted from the ground, and that's looking pretty much in the same direction off to the east. And the slag deposit, main slag deposit, is down to the left here. Came out of the BHP smelter. And the top left-hand corner here, you can see where the Junction Mine was, and that area there's a small area of what is the only remaining gossan from the whole deposit. Excuse me. That photo taken in 2019. Henk, you probably won't have such an issue, or you will have a bit of an issue with this, unless Peter has marked a number of species on the specimens. Sometimes you'll find it difficult to actually work out what you've got. And the reason for that is, well, there's a number of reasons for it. One of the ones that should have been easy in the first place was rhodonite. Until a few years ago, when ferrorhodonite was first described, with Broken Hill being the type locality, and rhodonite and ferrorhodonite and bustamite can all look very, very similar, if not identical in some instances, and they range from browns or tans to browns to reds. Ralph Bottrell, who some of you would know from Tasmania, he lived and worked in Broken Hill for a number of years, and he has said, after ferrorhodonite was described, that of the 100 or so analyses that he's performed on rhodonite, the vast majority would have actually fallen in the ferrorhodonite side of the equation in terms of chemistry. Another one that you can find very difficult to distinguish between is chlorargyrite and bromargyrite. They're both silver halides. One has chlorine, one has bromine. But chlorargyrite of Broken Hill is generally and has historically been called emberlite, which is actually a bromium chlorargyrite. So it has a significant amount of bromium in it as well. And when you look at what is a bromargyrite and you look at a bromium chlorargyrite, they can actually look identical. So you're not necessarily going to be able to tell visually between the two. Similarly with manganose and calcite, cutnorite and rhodochrosite, the copper-bearing adamite, Cu adamite, and olivenite and zinc olivenite. Now, I've taken the view that I know that zinc olivenite has been confirmed at Broken Hill, and Peter Elliott actually did the analysis on a particular specimen, And that specimen is identical visually to specimens of what used to be called cuproatomite. And if you watch, there was a talk on SUMEB by Mal Southwood a couple of years ago, I think, about cuproatomite in SUMEB. And the determination from there was that all the cuproatomites are actually zinc olivinite. So that seems to be a general view, but not necessarily a universally held view. So I class mine now in the zinc olivinite field. And particularly in the open cuts, there's lots of phosphates, arsenates, and sulfates, series of minerals. And a lot of them can be very, very similar looking. And an example here is, obviously this isn't just, well, this is a series, butantite, segnatite. Collagite isn't part of the series, but they all occur as olive green crystals or crusts. They all look very, very similar, but they have very different and fairly complex chemical formula. So as you'll see as we go through, you can't necessarily tell one from another. So with the minerals that you're going to see, some actually are analysed specimens, probably not as many as Henk showed us last time round from Iron Monarch, but some are. Some are from specimens that were collected at the same time as the analysed specimens. So you might have a specimen that was analysed by, say, Bill Birch, and someone like Bernie Day would have been collecting at the same time and got a piece that was maybe even off that same piece of rock. And Bill has looked at it and said, yes, that's the same mineral. Some are identified purely through their associations. Some are visually identified, and probably the easier ones to identify. Some are based on the previous owner's label, and that can be people like Bernie Day, Joe Price, Joan Lamond, and they are, well, Jack Leach was another. They are all people that volunteered for a period of time at the Museum of Victoria. And so if they actually had something that they didn't know what it was, then they would get assistance from people like Bill Birch to identify it. So they're generally pretty good. Not 100%, I've found, but generally pretty good. And some actually came from museum specimens. So again, the guys that were doing the volunteering, if a little crumb fell off the side of a piece, they were generally allowed to keep that.
Oh.
So anyway, let's get into the minerals themselves. It's going to be alphabetic. It's the easiest way to go. And the first one is a calcite, which is these little needles that you can see at the top sitting on native silver. And this may or may not be a post-mining occurrence. A calcite has been recorded from the mine, but as some of you may know, if you have a silver-bearing specimen in a mineral cabinet, sometimes it can actually form either black coatings or little sprays of needles, which is actually a calcite silver sulfide. Adamite, I mentioned cuproatomite before. I've kept that out. That's down in the Zs. But adamite does occur in other colours at the deposit, and this particular one, this yellow one, quite attractive. A Garlite can be confused with other minerals such as mixite or even brochantite, and predominantly was found just in the Kintore open cut, associated with other arsenates. That's one of the ones where the association is the easiest way to determine what you've got. But it can be blue or green, and it may be that it's not just yttrium, but there might be other rare earth elements, and maybe that's the reason for some of the colour differences. Aldredite is one of the rare and relatively recently described secondary cadmium-bearing minerals, and it's these beautiful little blue acicular crystals here, associated with Smithsonite. Here's a Smithsonite crystal here, for instance. Anglesite normally occurs as white, colourless, tan, yellowish, maybe brown crystals. And there were a couple of times when it was found as green crystals. This is one of those occurrences. A very, very attractive mineral.
Too much.
Sorry. Now, this one isn't right on the line of lode itself. It's on basically a parallel lode. It's a mine from a mine called the Broken Hill Consolidated, and it is an analysed specimen. It is slightly different in form to Ashburtonite that you get from the type locality in Western Australia, but it is Ashburnite nonetheless. And that was found by a friend of mine, John Carey, who lives in Bendigo. Sorry, I just let Jim Glenn in. And analysed by Peter Elliott. And when I was up in Broken Hill the last time, tried to find the locality, the area where this came from, but found out afterwards by looking at, with Trevor Dart, looking at satellite images, that I was about 500 metres short of where I needed to be. So when I get back up to Broken Hill, I'm going to be going a little bit further along the line to actually find this locality. It occurred with other species like Mermatite as well. So there could be a fair bit more there. Atacamate is a mineral of the arid zones. When Jane Curry did her Chilean talk, we saw from the arid zones there, we saw Atacamate. And from an Australian perspective, some of the best Atacamate specimens in the world come from places like Moonta Wallaroo and other arid areas. It occurs in Ballarat as well, but in nowhere near the size specimens that you get in some of the other Australian localities. But you can see here the typical termination of Atacamate, and over here too. Calcite is one of a number of secondary zinc minerals. Normally occurs as sort of little puffballs or acicular groups, and this one is quite well defined thin bladed crystals, and is pretty much probably the best Calcite specimen that I've come across. I've only got one that looks like this as well. Unfortunately, it's very hard to clean. As you can see, you've got little bits of gossainy stuff sort of stuck here and there, and I'm not going to actually put it into an ultrasonic just in case. Azurite, this one's for Bruce. Nice blue mineral. In the early days of mining at Broken Hill, some reasonably large azurite crystals were extracted, up to many centimetres in size. In more recent times, it's been found predominantly in the Block 14 open cut, but you can still come across azurite specimens from Broken Hill, micros and thumbnails. If you talk to some of the other collectors, some of the people in Broken Hill themselves, some of the dealers, they're not that hard to come by, even though it's relatively uncommon mineral at the deposit. Barite comes in a number of colours in particular, usually white or colourless or tan, but can be yellow as in this one. It can be green or even blue. And for the most part, they're generally groups of bladed crystals similar to this. Bastnasite, one of the rare earth minerals there. Now, the yellow crystals in the middle are mimetites. The bastnasite are these tiny little orange crystals that you can see dotted around. There's a lot of them, but they're very, very small. Baildonite was relatively common in the arsenate zone, particularly in Kintore, and I quite like this specimen for a number of reasons. That the Baildonite crystals are actually quite nice, or the aggregates are quite nice anyway, but they also have what looks like cleavage faces here, but they're actually not cleavage faces, it's just the habit. And they're like little mirrors when you look into them. And also with this specimen, you can see a bit of the paragenesis too. So here we have mimetite crystals, here and here, surrounded by what is probably Galite as like a coating, and then the rest of the area then filled in with Baronite. First are the slag minerals, Barite. Only seen a couple of specimens of this. It's pretty rare and it's not very pretty. It's basically just a pale blue crust with some sort of platy crystals that don't really do a lot, but it's a rare species. Baronite is uncommon. It's one of the iron phosphates, and in this particular instance here, we've got the white, tan to white baronite, and the green crystals are chalcosiderite. Now we get into one of the ones that's difficult to actually determine. This I've put as budantite / segnatite as a series. Given some of the other specimens that I know have been analysed, this is probably tending towards the segnatite end, but there's no guarantee of that. And really, unless you get a specimen analysed, you should be actually referring to it as that. Second of the cadmium secondaries, this one named after Bill Birch. And again, it's pale blue acicular crystals. You can see a few sprays of it there. Very rare. Brochantite, which is the bluish crystals here. And I think I said the other day that this is probably a little bit more blue than the actual specimen. They're probably a little bit more greenish than that. But what I liked about this photo was the goethite underneath. And you can see these beautiful eyes that are all the way through it, and tentacles and all sorts of stuff. And it looks a bit like it's something out of a science fiction movie or whatever. Bustamite. Now, bustamite is one of the rock-forming minerals. It's manganese, calcium manganese silicate, and can occur as what used to be termed hairy bustamite, which is very fine hairs, even finer than these needles, right the way through up to crystals that are meters in length. So a very significant range for the species. Calcite's ubiquitous. It is everywhere in the deposit, and a vast majority of, not all, but the vast majority of specimens fluoresce quite strongly a deep pink or a red because of the manganese. Caledonite is these little sprays in the background here. Again, a slag specimen, and either malachite or brochantite or whatever in the foreground. I love the colour combination of red and green, and these carminite crystals, named obviously because of the carmine red, show that to perfection. The green is probably segnatite or budantite segnatite, and the carminite can form in very tiny little needles through to needles about this size, but it doesn't get a lot bigger than that. Again, that's about 3.5 millimeters across, so maybe up to 0.5 mil or 1 mil on exceptional specimens. Cerasite's another ubiquitous mineral. It's throughout the whole deposit. It can occur as colourless white, black due to inclusions of probably coronadite. Can sometimes be hard to distinguish from phosgenite, which is rare at the deposit, but does occur, and also anglicite, and can quite often occur as twins, stellate twins. And you saw one of those in the cabinet specimens at the beginning. Now, chlorhydrite. This is a particularly sharp chlorhydrite crystal. Most of them are quite rounded and sort of waxy looking, and often purplish grey in colour, and that is because they have been exposed to the light. They are colour sensitive. This one has been protected inside this vug of chalcophenite. These are chalcophenite crystals, and consequently is still a good colour of that sort of olive green, and it is a particularly sharp crystal. Another one of the rare earths, Cerasite. It's quite rare and not exactly spectacular, but not bad. Conolite is fairly uncommon and was found predominantly, I think, at the Block 14 open cut, and is that sort of intense blue that we know conolite can form. Another one for Bruce. Oh, Steve Stewart's got to come in. Sorry, Steve. Native copper is very abundant and can be copper coloured, such as this fresh bit here, or coated with maybe a thin layer of cuprite or tarnished, and can also be covered in secondary copper minerals like broshantite or other various green minerals. And this one looks like Paramorphite, and it sort of is. So the green that you see is Quartzite. The Paramorphite are these colourless needles that are underneath. You can just see the tips of them here. And at Broken Hill, Paramorphite can form as a calcium-rich. I don't think it's yet been determined as phosphohedrophane, but they can be colourless to white. And so that's what's been covered up here by, or partially covered up by, the Quartzite specimen species. Most of the coronidite that you get, it's a lead manganese oxide. It's sort of pretty cruddy looking, generally black. But you do get it in needle form like this, which can be quite attractive, particularly if it has other minerals sitting on it. Sometimes you get smithsonites or memetites or something similar to that sitting on top of the coronidite, which is quite nice. Cuprite can form as cubes or octahedral crystals and can be coated. This is coated by, I'm thinking probably brochantite, because you've got Lunaride as well, so sulfate maybe rather than the malachite being carbonate, but it hasn't been analysed, so I don't know for sure. But you can get some fairly large cuprite crystals. Again, historically, in the mining operations, there were a lot of larger specimens, showy specimens that were kept for posterity and are now in places like the Geo Centre in Broken Hill. So you go to Broken Hill, you can see some of these large specimens. This is a Cerasite crystal here, and dolomite, saddle-shaped, but not always in this sort of form, and it's generally Zinkian dolomite, so zinc-rich, and can be sometimes difficult to pick from Smithsonite. This is a specimen of duftite, and these little aggregates here are the duftite. Down here, the green is Baronite. And here we have an analysed ferrorhodonite, a little bit brown, probably a little bit browner in this photo than it actually is, but it can range from brown through to red. Fluorapatites, the apatites generally at Broken Hill are found in the sulfide. So here you've got Galena, you've got sphalerite, and you've probably got a bit of pyrite or arsenopyrite there. You've got a Spaceteen Garnet here, which is very, very typical of Broken Hill specimens. And then you've got this rounded apatite crystal here, which is, in this case, is blue, but can also be other various shades. And this one's got a nice little rainbow in there as well. It's quite attractive. And they can be quite large crystals too. And apophyllite, there are probably two forms. This is the rarer of the two. The other one has more sort of pyramidal terminations, usually with a square cross-section pinacoid face, whereas this one's a a smaller pyramid on the end of it, and sitting on inner-site crystals. Fluorite generally at Broken Hill is, it's rare, but it's generally found as octahedral green, mint green crystals. This is obviously not mint green, it's a very intense deep purple, and it's quite an unusual one. There are a few different colours that it comes in, but this is certainly a rare one. We have a zinc spinel garnite, which is this crystal over here. And the reason I placed it over this side in the photo was to include the green coloration, particularly here, and then notice that I had some here anyway. And that's actually garnite as well. And that's the actual color of it. It's just when you get a crystal like this, it's so opaque you can't see it. You can see a little bit of a hint of green here and there, but predominantly not. Goethite is normally not even mentioned on specimens, and for the most part is just a cruddy limonitic sort of brown gunk. But this one is fibrous goethite, and there's not too much of that I've seen. You occasionally get native gold, very rare. It's not known as a gold mine. Here we have a couple of rare species. So Gaurdaite is this hexagonal greyish mineral here. And this mineral is tennessite with a K. And there's also little yellow mematites there as well. I put this one in because of the rarity factor. Goslerite is a zinc sulfate. It's quite possible that this is a post-mining occurrence. I don't know for sure. I didn't actually collect it, but it is quite likely. But you can see sort of crystalline view, these little needles here. So it's not too bad for the species. Occasionally you'll find graphite sort of star-shaped or stellar nodules inside the matrix. When you break them open, you get this typical graphite sort of look. And they were not common, but not uncommon in the Kintor cut. I think probably a lot of these again were overlooked. They weren't in a cavity and you know, nice sprays or whatever. You had to actually break the matrix to find them. But I don't think too many people focused on them. And greenockite, the cadmium sulfide, quite often cadmium is extracted from sphalerite in many deposits around the world. These orange and red crystals are greenockite crystals. But interestingly here, they seem to be in the middle of what looks to be an arsenopyrite crystal. There is sphalerite elsewhere on the specimen, but that's not where the cadmium is. So it was quite an interesting one from that perspective for me. Gypsum is not necessarily a post-mining mineral, but can be, and can be colourless or white or orange, depending on what inclusions I suppose it's got, and not necessarily as bright as this one. But could also be fair-sized crystals as well. So, you know, many centimetres or tens of centimetres in length in some instances. Heidenbergite's one of the sort of generally more rock-forming minerals, and this is a particularly transparent one. Most of them are translucent rather than transparent, and maybe even opaque, but a nice green. Now, this one was a bit of a surprise. The actual specimen was labelled for the Smithsonite, which is, you know, these rounded areas here, these smaller crystals, and sitting also on the hematite. And hematite wasn't mentioned on the label, but they're quite distinct groups of crystals with some quite nice, interesting zoning on them. and it's not a common mineral at Broken Hill either. Hemimorphite is probably a little bit more common. It's one of the secondary zinc species. It usually occurs associated with things like auricalcite and rosacite, and also with smithsonite and other minerals. And usually colourless or white, but can be a range of lighter hues as well. Now here we've got another one similar to the Quartzite that you saw before, where we had Quartzite sitting on the Paramorphite. Here we've got Hexagonite, which is this yellow crust here, sitting on mimetite crystals that are also colourless, and they're the tops of the mimetite crystals poking out there. And this is a Baronite at the back. Hoganite, there's still some debate as to whether Hoganite is a naturally occurring mineral or whether it has a hand by man, but some of the specimens that I've seen, the way that the mineral has formed looks natural, but you can never be 100% certain. One of the rarer zinc secondary minerals is hydrozincite, which is this fluorescent white here. It's just a slightly less bright white on the actual, in this case, I think, Cerasite crystals. And probably easier to pick up with a convoy than by sight. Innersite's another one of the manganese silicates, generally a rock-bearing mineral, but can be quite attractive transparent crystals, such as this one. Iodidrite's another one of the halides, and generally occurs more as sort of blobby masses, but can be white, slightly yellowish, and that's probably because of the bromium content again. And this is a particularly sharp tetrahedral crystal. Jamesonite, and this one is an analysed specimen from the Consols mine. Kaolinite is the white material here, and you've got tiny little yellow memetites dotted around again. Now this is an analysed specimen, so I know that this is kintorite and not one of the other similar looking minerals. But you can see here it looks very similar to the budantite, segmatite. Lubethanite is relatively common from block 14 in particular. A good example here also that shows the abundance of Spaceteen garnets. Spaceteen is one of those minerals that if you see it on the matrix, you can pretty well guarantee that you know where the specimens come from. And this one is a photo that graced the cover of an issue of the Australian Journal of Mineralogy a couple of years ago. It's Lunaride on Cerasite, so these are colourless Cerasites or greyish Cerasite crystals. But you can see here, these crystals here are actually reflections from the back of this spray. So it's quite a nice result to get from the photo. Malachite's pretty well an abundant mineral, certainly much more common than azurite, and generally in crystal form. I included this one because of the nice banding that you can see. It's obviously grown over a period of time. One of my favourite minerals from Broken Hill is Marshite, and Marshite is very unusual in that it's a copper iodide mineral. As far as I'm aware, it is, if not the only, one of a very, very small number of copper minerals that actually fluoresces, because copper generally quenches fluorescence. And it does occur as very bright red response under UV. And at one stage, and Paul knows this as well, Marshite was considered to be a very rare mineral from Broken Hill. And in more recent times, people have found that it's probably not as rare as was originally thought. And that's due to the advent of the convoy torches, and people going around to shows and shining the torch in daylight on Broken Hill specimens to see if they could see masses of little red crystals appearing. And they did. They appear on a hell of a lot more specimens than originally thought. So if you've got Cerasites or other species on Broken Hill specimens, or especially if there's ones that have cuprite somewhere on the specimen, get your convoy torch and just shine it and see if you can see any bright red. If you do, it'll be Marshite. Morbiite is another Broken Hill type locality species, and this is probably Segnetite that it is with. The green is the Segnetite, and the reddish brown is the Morbiite. It's a dimorph of Carmenite, hence probably the colour. Now, Miazite, it's another halide, silver halide. This yellow crystal here is the Miazite. This larger crystal is cuprite, coated by malachite. Mimetite is very, very common in the oxidized zone and can be, as you've seen already, colourless, yellow, it can be white, it can be orange, it can be brown, even greenish, and sometimes zoned, such as this one. And here we have orange Minium. Now, Minium is a mineral that is thought to have occurred at Broken Hill due to an underground mine fire, which may or may not be the case. I don't think anybody was there at the time. So, and this particular specimen has a chlorhydrite crystal, well, not really a crystal, a chlorhydrite blob, surrounded by acantite and probably native silver. Another slag mineral, the National Museum of Wales-ite, and that's these blue platy crystals here. Olivenite, it can occur, it generally occurs more as prismatic sort of crystals, but this one's quite unusual in that it's sort of thin bladed rosettes. It's a little bit different to what you normally see. Atavite, another cadmium mineral, this time a carbonate. It's this sort of pearly looking mass of crystals here. Pyrudite, which is a rare mercury sulfide. Sorry, sulfide. And that's the red area in the middle. And this may be capgaronite, I think, around the outside, but it's not analysed. Pharmacosiderite normally occurs as cubes, as traditionally you'll see in most deposits around the world. But this particular form is actually tetrahedral crystals, as you can see here. It's very unusual. Plimerite, named after Professor Ian Plimer, and it's the blackish sort of crystals here that you can see, associated with labethanite and probably hinsdelite, the yellowish green, and colourless mimetite. Sorry, colourless paramorphites, not mimetites. Another silver sulfur salts, polybasite. Posnjackite, which is the blue area in there, again in slag. Pseudomalachite, which is not the best specimen that I have, and certainly not the best photo that I had, but I included this one because you've got this interesting ring of pseudomalachite. So there's nothing, there's a little bit of pseudomalachite in the middle there, but for the most part, it's just a ring. And it's quite an unusual occurrence. One of the ruby silvers, pyrogyrite, beautiful red crystals here. Pyrite is very common. Excuse me, talking too much. And does tend to suffer from pyrite disease a fair bit as well. I've had a number of specimens where you've had some beautiful, say, calcite or barite or something else that has been sitting on a layer of pyrite, and the pyrite is decomposed and the whole specimen falls apart. This one's not like that, thankfully. The entire specimen is probably 4 or 5 centimeters across and is comprised of a number of prismatic, sort of stubby looking calcite crystals. So this is the C-axis running down this way. And invariably on the termination of every single one is a little grouping of pyrite crystals. So probably some sort of epitaxial growth. You can see there's pyrite crystals dotted around elsewhere as well, but every single one of the prismatic calcites has this little toupee, which is quite fun. Paramorphite, I've already mentioned a couple of times. It can occur as colourless or white calcium paramorphite through to various shades of yellow, green, and brown. And this is a particularly interesting one in that it's a spiky paramorphite. It's got this probably secondary growth of crystals that have gone out from perpendicularly from the main crystal, and don't see that habit very often. Hexagonal pyrosmalite, quartz. Quartz is, for the most part, is found as what is known as blue quartz, and it's massive, almost like an opaline look to it. And when you do get individual crystals, they're either colourless, maybe amethystine, and occasionally smoky, but it's quite rare in crystal form. Raspaite's another one of the rarer, better known species from Broken Hill, and type locality is Broken Hill, and it was named after Charles Rasp, who found the locality in the first place. And it's a dimorph of stoltzite. In fact, you can see little yellow stoltzites sitting on this specimen as well, and they both occur together, but Raspaite is much rarer than stoltzite. Rhodochrosite's another carbonate mineral that is very common and generally in large specimens from Broken Hill, and it's actually hard to get a micro to photograph. So this was like a little vug inside a large, much larger piece. Can be various shades of pink through to reddish, but not anywhere near the South African red. And here's a rhodonite, and I mentioned before that you can sometimes confuse this with ferrorhodonite. This one is more likely to be rhodonite based on the colour, but not guaranteed unless it's analysed, and it's sitting in Galena, which is quite typical. They actually form within the Galena mass itself. Here we have another iron phosphate, rockbridgeite. It's these dark green, almost blackish green sprays, and these are bladed crystals, which it's normally too small to actually pick what the crystal habit actually looks like. Rosacite, along with auricalcite and hemimorphite and smithsonite, are the main zinc-bearing minerals that you come across. This has got little smithsonite crystals associated with it as well. You can see those all the way around. Samplite is a rare mineral at Broken Hill, not a patch on the Lake Boga material. It's certainly not, doesn't give you the same thin bladed crystals that places like Boga do, but it's a rare mineral. It's found from, I think, 4 localities in Australia, all in pretty well arid conditions. And of course the type locality in Chile, which is also arid. But it's a rare one, and these are probably about as good as it gets from Broken Hill. An analysed specimen, Schultzite, doesn't look anything like Schultzite from Reephook Hill in South Australia, which is probably the classic locality in Australia for the particular species, where you get the typical Roman sword that is so well known for the species, but it is an analysed specimen. Schulenburgite, the pale blue. Serpierite, that's in a corroded galena. Native silver, it was a silver mine, so you'd expect to find native silver, and there were masses of this stuff that were found in the upper part of the ore body in particular in the early days, and certainly made Broken Hill very rich because of the silver that they actually mined there. Smithsonite, another ubiquitous carbonate mineral that occurs there. That's very common. Looks particularly nice when you have it on the black background. It's generally coronadite. Spangelite, now this is the blue platy crystals. You can see the individual plates sitting behind here, but these are Cerasite crystals that are coated with little platelets like that of spangelite. Spacetine, this is one of my favourite specimens of spacetine, and it is just found absolutely everywhere. You find it in the oxidized zone, the Gossen. You find it in the sulfide zone as part of the matrix. It can be found as individual crystals such as this, or it can be basically a garnet rock. It can also occur in quite large crystals too.
Oh, not too bad, Leslie.
Oh, sorry. And Stoltzite, the dimorph of ricepite, occurs from sort of pale yellow through orange through grey, a reasonable range of colours. And in this particular instance, it's associated with brown pyromorphite. And this was a Will Henderson specimen. Bill Henderson passed away a few years ago, and some of his micros were available for sale at Tucson, and I managed to pick this one up when I was over there. Strengite, sometimes a bit more pinkish or purplish than this particular specimen. Again, you can see the same sort of habit that we can see on some of the other species, and can make it, again, quite difficult to determine. Not common either, which some of the arsenites are more common. And here's another Spaceteen Garnet sitting in underneath this cluster of sulfur crystals. This one was a specimen that I collected from right down the bottom of the Kintor open cut. They just started hitting the top of what was determined to be the supergene zone, and you had a massive corroded sort of galena there, and in the cavities you had hemimorphite crystals, you had stoltzites, you had sulfur, you had pyromorphites and others as well. And it was an interesting time. I think the temperature was getting up to around about 55 degrees centigrade in the bottom of the open cut. So it was hard going. There's not too much uranium in the ore body at Broken Hill, but there is lots of copper and there is lots of phosphate. So when you do get a bit of uranium, it's not surprising to see it form as a copper phosphate, uranium-bearing copper phosphate, such as torvanite. Now this is an interesting one. We have signetite balls here, and these crystals, this outline here is carmonite, and then sumcorite is the orange granular sort of crystals that are coating the carmonite. Another one with a bit of a link back to Sumebite is the blue spheres with Libethenite and probably Hinsdelite. Vorquelinite is this little group here, very, very tiny crystals. This is a Memetite crystal over this side. And Wolfenite is nowhere near as common as Stolzite, but they can look very, very similar. It can be quite hard to pick one from the other. Excuse me. Associated with Memetite, yellow Memetite. We have Wurtzite here with secondary, probably epitaxial growth of Galena. Linko, into the Zs, Zinco-Libethenite is this bluish coloured material here. Not very pretty, but it's rare. And zinc-olivinite. And I've put here, or is it just copper-bearing adamite? The jury is still out. All right, that's the last one. We're up to the Zs. So I'll stop sharing and ask if there are any questions.
I have one. You were talking about the Marshite being fluorescent under long wave, but does it fluoresce under short wave as well?
I believe so, but
I
certainly
don't have a long wave light yet.
Oh, well, get yourself a convoy, Bruce.
Yeah.
It's daylight fluorescence with the convoy because the convoy is so powerful. You don't need to darken the room. I can open up a drawer with broken hill material in it and shine the convoy across and actually pick them up very easily. So I might be able to show. Just hang on for one sec.
Yeah, while he's doing that, I was just going to comment that we've also found Marshite from Mudaroo in the Cuprite. So if you've got any Mudaroo specimens, they're also worth looking at. Mudaroo is just across the border in South Australia in the Ullery block.
Interesting.
Or maybe not. I can't find one at the moment, but I'd have to search around for them. But yeah, they certainly respond very quickly, very strongly. Paul and I have discussed this a bit as well. There's a locality called Mutaroo in South Australia, which is a copper mine. And Frank, you were involved, and Richard, I think, involved in this discussion too. And with the convoy, I have a habit now of just pointing it at specimens just to see if there's any response. And we actually found Marshite from Mutaroo, which hadn't been recorded there before. And when I looked closely, you could actually see the tetrahedral crystals. But we didn't know that I didn't know that's what it was. I think the original label, because it wasn't collected by me, the original label said sphalerite because it was a tetrahedral crystal and sort of colorish, it's colorless-ish. And then Paul found material that he'd actually collected there a while back and found Marshite on quite a bit of it. So it is, I think, one of those minerals that is not necessarily as uncommon as...
So yeah, pretty much every specimen I had that had cuprite on it had Marshite on it. I think the biggest crystal I found is about 0.1 of a mil, so they're not big, but they're very bright.
They do seem to be associated with cuprite at Chuquicamata in Chile.
Yep.
I can't remember if they fluoresce, but they do tend to turn a kind of red colour, maroon colour if they're exposed to daylight, you know.
Yes, that's quite common. It takes a while for them to alter. I've got one from the Russian locality of Rubitsko. I can't remember the pronunciation.
Yeah, Rubitsch.
And that's quite a large Marshite. That's sort of close to a centimetre in size and does
Mhm.
exactly the same thing. And of course, there's lots of cuprite there too.
And does the anglicite, you said there was green anglicite, does that occur with limonite? Because I've noticed that in Sardinia and Montevecchio, you get green anglicite, and the green anglicite always occurs on limonite, iron rich, rather than the lead material, massive, you know?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, Jane, because there's lots of lead and iron in the deposit. If it was if it was specifically because of that, you might expect to see more of it, maybe. I don't know.
Mm.
But the matrix looks the same on, you know, green and other.
Mm.
Do we have any other questions?
Steve, is there any murderkite there?
Sorry, any?
Murderkite.
That's a good question. I don't think so, but hang on, I'll just have a quick look. Not described so far. So maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
No other questions?
Well, no questions.
Fantastic
but,
presentation.
the comment would be that, first of all, thanks for all the information. And I'm very curious what's in the package that I hopefully will come by next week. So I hope I can compare the things that I get with yours.
Personally, I'm very disappointed because now I have to go back through my entire Broken Hill collection looking for bits.
Exactly.
The more you look, the more you find, definitely.
That's the aspect of a hobby. You always have to work hard.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've recently been told that I'm going to have access to look through a few hundred thumbnails of Broken Hill material as well. So be interesting to see what's in
a lot of work. As usual, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I've got to wait until we're back out of lockdown again before I can do that. So
Sure.
Hopefully that won't ever happen.
well, won't get out of lockdown.
Whoa.
We do. This one's supposed to be just a 7-day circuit breaker, which should be finishing theoretically tomorrow night, but who knows?
And then you go to level what?
We're still under restrictions. It's still,
Yeah.
but we're not restricted as to how far we can travel and so on. So we obviously still can't go to Melbourne or other lockdown areas, but
yeah.
Just today we are allowed to get into the US again after a year, and I surely hope that we can get into Australia also on short notice.
Yeah, well, we just don't know yet. The
Yeah,
federal government has a plan which they call getting to 70% and 80% of double dose, and there's certain things then scheduled to happen.
That's what you need. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but even at 80%, we've still got, like, Western Australia are already staying with COVID numbers that the way they are in Victoria and New South Wales, that they're not going to open the border until that improves, and only because they want to protect the health system.
On
old kangaroos.
On the news 2 days ago, they said that Biden had removed the restrictions for non-essential travel from Europe, but you had to show that you had a vaccination, or that you had it
everywhere,
or you could get on the airline.
Yeah, that would be from November. It was to take effect as well.
They said, well, you never know what the news people here get right or wrong, but they implied that it was immediate.
From this end, it's November.
I'm in Italy now, and in every restaurant I go into, I have to show my green pass. So it's everywhere.
Yep. Yeah, I think Herwig is in Spain at the moment too, isn't he?
You can't stay put.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll fold for today and see you all back here in 2 weeks' time for Gold Hill.
Okay. All right.
Photography.
Bye.
Hey, thanks,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. See ya.
Okay, bye.